to episode 14 of podcasts, which is actually a part 2 with Dan Artaev, founder and managing partner of Artaev at Law PLLC. Dan is a business attorney based in Michigan, specifically the Metro Detroit area. He's been, working on multiple places of law, but he also specializes in freight guard law and, logistics law in general. Let's kick it off. How's it going, Dan?
Hey, Alex, thanks for having me back.
Yeah. I mean, there's not many people out there talking to real lawyers, regarding logistics and especially the freight guard space. So, I mean, episode 1 was cool. We touched on a certain topic we didn't exactly have time to go through. So I'm happy to have you back for part 2.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be back. And yeah, thanks for the introduction. As you mentioned, I'm based in the Metro Detroit area here. I've had the pleasure of working with carriers across the United States. Actually, I do a lot of advising, consulting, and helping them out with various issues, including, like you mentioned, just resolving freight guard reports, general reputation management, and other issues that a lot of trucking companies face.
Yeah, man, I kind of like that description, reputation management, rather than just saying, oh, I'm a freight guard lawyer, because there are other facets to the logistics industry that a carrier would want to deal with as opposed to just freight guard reports.
But, yeah, absolutely.
Last time we kind of touched on freight guards and the impact that they have on carriers, as well as kind of your process of removing the freight guards for the carriers that have kind of retained you. I mean, have you had any developments in this area? Have you dealt with any cases since that point?
Yeah. I've been busy. I've had a few carriers reach out to me for assistance with resolving freight guards. And again, the most important thing when a carrier is facing a freight guard, in order to do anything about it, you first have to make sure that it's actually a false statement of fact that's going up there, that it's an allegation that can be proven either false or true. So, when somebody's out there and there's a posting about them on Carrier 411 accusing them of being a double broker, when in fact they're not a double broker, and for example, they were just running 2 different MCs, one attached to a dispatch service, one to an actual carrier. That's actually happened to one of my clients. So, it's a misunderstanding, but I can also see how the broker can reach the wrong conclusion that it's a double broker.
I mean, as my, brief period so far in the brokerage side of things, I can say with confidence after, talking to a lot of carriers as a broker, they kind of come into the conversation with the opinion that brokers as a whole haven't really been carriers, and they might not understand the intricacies of being a carrier. And dispatch services always have, a bad stigma behind them. And I think we went over on the last show where somebody had like 1 cell phone, but they were dispatching 7 or 8 different owner ops, so 7 or 8 different MC numbers. And, the broker was like, hey, you're a double broker because you have 1 cell phone for work. And I mean, that's not true. You're not going to have 7 cell phones to dispatch 7 different owner operators. So.
No, of course not. And, I've been very happy to help some of these carriers out without actually resorting to full-on litigation. And that's been kind of my approach all along. I like to practice law in order to solve problems, not to attack people. And so when a carrier comes to me with a problem, my first instinct is, how can we resolve this in a way
way?
Yeah, minimizes the costs, minimizes the time spent, minimizes the effort for everyone. Can we reach an agreement? And
that sort of brings us into that thing. What is your process? How does, the Dan Artaev process work? When you're first introduced to a case regarding a false freight guard, what's kind of step 1? What are you doing at that point?
Right. Well, first of all, I do my due diligence with respect to the carrier that's reached out to me. I want to make sure that this is actually what I like to call an actionable case. So if it were down the road to go into a courtroom, we could actually stand in front of a judge and present our case with a straight face. And what that means is basically I have to do some vetting on my own end and make sure that the story of the carrier that this particular freight guard is false is actually supported by documentation. Now, once we do that, I engage in what I can do in terms of an informal process, reaching out to the broker involved, and preferably actually their legal team. I like to deal with another lawyer immediately. And the reason for that is because, first of all, it makes the broker hire a lawyer and, makes them appreciate the situation is serious.
Yeah, actually, the sidebar on that.
Yeah.
So, after you've been kind of going through this, do most larger brokerages have counsel on payroll, or are they kind of actually having to go out and hire a lawyer? When you run into them.
Most companies have a lawyer that they've dealt with, maybe not necessarily permanently on staff, but somebody who helped them set up their company, for example. And it's also good to talk to another lawyer, because both the lawyer representing the carrier and the broker's lawyer, they're sort of distanced from the situation, and they can talk in a reasonable, non-heated way, not tainted by emotion of you screwed me over on this load and cost me a bunch of money, and you're a garbage person, and your business.
I mean, I think that's kind of where a third party, the market for this freight guard removal from a third party would come into play, because, I mean, you'd have a lot of carriers coming into it very emotional, and you would have a lot of freight guards, I'm sure, that you deal with being posted by brokers out of emotion. So now you have a situation where the broker's emotional, the carrier's emotional, and they're not going to be able to kind of deal with it in a professional manner. And I think that's where the third party really does lend, a great benefit to the situation.
Yeah, I've definitely found that helpful. And, if for some reason they don't want to involve a lawyer or just don't want to cooperate, what I do with carriers is help them understand how the next steps, the litigation process would work. And I also assist them with finding local counsel in the state that the broker's located in, so they can run the courtroom procedure, and I can kind of just delegate or steer the ship from kind of a general counsel sort of perspective for the various carriers.
No, but I like your statement. I became a lawyer to help people and to solve problems. I didn't become a lawyer to take people to court and go to litigation and to just straight up attack people. So I mean, I think that's a really, kind of clear mind to go into it with, because I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of lawyers who might be like, oh yeah, I'll help you guys remove this freight guard. And their first step is to just send some formal writing to the brokerage. And I mean, I feel like you've missed that first step where you can kind of reach out and try to do it informally and save everybody, the headaches of it.
Or just straight up threaten with, I'm going to sue you. Not under
straight to court. That's it.
Yeah.
Done. See you next Friday.
Yeah. See you in court. I'm serving papers tomorrow. I think there's ways to de-escalate the situation in the benefit of everybody involved.
Oh, of course. But I mean, let's get into the meat and potatoes of today's show, the topic that we didn't have time to really get into in full detail, the word blackmail. And to get into it in context, most brokerages, I mean, I've run into this personally over the years as a carrier, and it's probably one of the worst things that can happen to you as a carrier, is when you get into a situation where, let's say, there's usually it's some type of a short pay or some type of a late fee, or just some type of, insignificant amount of money, like 150, 250, less than $500 of some type of a fee trying to be deducted off the carrier. And the carrier obviously doesn't enjoy the thought of losing money. And that's when you get into that, blackmail situation where the broker will say, if you don't accept this short pay, I will put a freight guard on your company. And I mean, is that blackmail? Is there legal issues with that sentence? Because we hear it all the time. It happens probably every day to somebody.
Well, it's a little bit surprising to me that this is a common issue, because the situation you describe is straight up wrong and potentially even criminal. Because blackmail is illegal both under state law and federal law. And when there's a threat to do something negative with the intent to get the carrier, in this case, to do something that's detrimental to the carrier, with the understanding that the broker will somehow benefit, in your example, monetarily from this.
Monetarily.
Yeah,
Usually monetarily.
yeah, you just broke state law, and you potentially broke federal law, which is carries a heavier stick, so to speak, when you have the Department of Justice or the FBI involved all of a sudden instead of the local sheriff's department looking. And
So let me go over
yeah,
an example with you that actually this was the last form of this situation I dealt with in my carrier career. This was a few months back where I can't really even remember what happened. We dropped a trailer in some yard, and that's where the receiver wanted it, but that's not where the customer wanted it. And we ended up leaving, and the broker was like, "Oh, if you don't turn your truck around 100 miles, we're going to short pay you X amount of dollars." And I told him, "Well, like, look, man, this is where I was told to drop it by the people there. I mean, there's nothing in my rate con that says I need to drop it. It just says drop." And the funny part of this story is that the lot in question is maybe, I don't know, man, 100 meters by 100 meters. There's nowhere else really to put this trailer. So it's not like there's a dock door situation. It's not like we messed something up. It was more just like they wanted it 10 feet to the left instead of 10 feet to the right situation. But long story short, he wanted to short pay me like, I think $400 or $500. And I told him that's absolutely ridiculous. He's like, "Okay, we'll just send your truck back and move the trailer 10 feet to the right." I was like, "Well, I'm 100 miles down the road going to my next pickup. That's not happening either." And long story short, I told him, "If you short pay me, I'm going to leave you some, negative Google reviews." And I just think it's, not a fair situation for anybody involved. And long story short, he told me, "If you like drop any negative, reviews about my company, I will freight guard your company." And so basically, I was put in a situation where I wasn't even allowed to warn other people that these brokers are a little bit shady. I was put in a situation where I'm getting short paid. I'm not allowed to leave a negative review, or I'm getting a freight guard. So does that fall in the blackmail, category?
Well, it's a pretty complicated fact pattern there, Alex, because you have one side threatening freight guard, the other side threatening a negative Google review. It's kind of like a tit for tat situation here.
So I'm a little guilty in that situation too, is what you're saying.
Yeah. I'm not saying that anybody's hands are totally clean in this particular situation. But
I mean, that's fair. That's a fair, legal
yeah,
perspective on
yeah,
it.
and the thing to remember about blackmail, it's also called extortion, blackmail and extortion.
I was gonna say this
Same
seems
thing.
more like an extortion. That seems like the word, like I'm
It's the
taking
same.
$400 from you or else sort of situation.
Well, and again, the threat of deducting a rate, it's more of like I'm threatening to breach an agreement or a contract. It's not really a threat to do something negative. So it's a little bit of a different situation. When it comes to extortion or blackmail, the threat has to be, I'm going to freight guard you unless you give me money or drive 100 miles out of your way or do this. That's the classic example.
Okay, so let's go over that example. I'm gonna deduct this $200 if you don't drive an extra 50 miles down the road to a delivery that wasn't promised or agreed upon. If you don't do that, I will freight guard you. Is that a correct situation, or you would label that as blackmail?
I would label that as blackmail or extortion, with the caveat that what they put in the freight guard is actually false.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, of course.
If they say this guy didn't want to drive 100 miles out of the way for the $50 reduction, that's completely true, and they're well within their right to make that posting. But if you don't do what they say and they accuse you of being a double broker for no reason, that's extortion.
So, I mean, what options does a carrier have in a situation where they say, X amount of dollars will be minus, and if you're not okay with that, I will freight guard you? What's the carrier's options in that situation, legally speaking?
Well, again, with the understanding that the freight guard will be false, or
Yeah,
So
no, of
we're
course.
talking,
I mean, with the understanding of, okay, so let's use the example. Like the carrier goes to a delivery, it cuts off at 3 p.m. The carrier pulls in at 2:50, so they're on time technically. They get in the guard
yeah,
shack at 2:50, so everything's the carrier's clean. He's done his job correctly. And then the broker wants to go make a freight guard report that says they were late for the cutoff, and that's why they didn't get unloaded, et cetera, et cetera. So I mean, it would be a false freight guard at that point. So what's the carrier's options to kind of like when the broker threatens you with a freight guard, what can the carrier do legally? Is there any legal action the carrier can pursue in a situation like that? Or are they just kind
well,
of stuck?
in the situation again where you are just arguing about maybe getting $50, $100 off, there's not really much you can do from a legal perspective. When it crosses the line is when the broker actually threatens to do something illegal or wrongful to hurt your business specifically. Like, I'm going to freight guard you if you don't pay me the $100 back or drive your truck out of the way. And if the carrier is facing that situation, there are a couple of options. First of all, it's entirely reasonable for a police report to even be filed over this because, like I said, blackmail or extortion is a criminal offense under state law and federal law. So I think it's worth saying, hey, okay, I'm going to file a police report because I think this is blackmail. That's entirely reasonable.
So
Now,
how would now
yeah,
okay, because I mean it's not like a funny situation. It just sounds funny to me because of all the years I've been doing this, it never crossed my mind. But how would that look? Like how would that how would that phone call from the truck driver or carrier or dispatcher, how would that phone call look to the police department? And which police department would they even be calling? The state that they're in, the state of the brokerage, their home state? I mean, how does that work?
yeah, just wherever you happen to be, I would recommend just to call the local police department, and you can just say, "Hey, I'd like to report extortion," and they take down your information and what happened. No, I mean you're laughing.
No, it just sounds
That's a
so funny to me.
legitimate. That's a
No, but
legitimate
Freyguard's
thing
serious.
to
Like that
do.
will cripple a
Yeah,
carrier. That will shut down a company. Like that report holds so much weight, and it can be over the silliest things. But I don't know. It is the most powerful tool any broker has in their toolbox. And a quick plug to my current company, Hammer Logistics. I've been told they have never filed a freight guard in their existence of being a brokerage. They do it the correct way. They just put a carrier on do not use and tell them, hey, you did a bad job. We're not going to use you again. But I'm sure. I mean, I've spoken with my boss, and he said, yeah, I will file a freight guard. If somebody steals some freight or does something
right.
absolutely illegal or insane. But I mean, knock on wood, like in the years they've been open, they haven't had to resort to freight guards because they know the power that the freight guard has. They know that is basically something reserved for illegal activities, not being 20 minutes late to a delivery.
Yeah, and absolutely, and I completely agree with you that Freight Guard has its legitimate uses to flag illegal activities. The situations that I encounter is that it's misused, and that's where I step in to sort of help out the carrier who's having an issue with that, and it is affecting their business quite severely. I
Yeah,
think a
and
lot of brokers don't realize that.
no, I think I mean, we've touched on it. You're not obviously a part of this type of a conversation about the industry, day-to-day activities of carriers and brokers as employees. But basically, people come in the industry, they don't have a lot of knowledge, and maybe they don't know how to handle situations. And I'm convinced that there are brokers operating in America that do not understand what they are doing to the company that they're filing the report on. And if they did understand the amount of difficulties and the seriousness of that report, I'm sure that they wouldn't be putting them out as much as they are. But they've never been on the other side of that phone. They've never been on the other side of the freight guard. And unfortunately, I have been many, many times in my past. And the minute it goes live, your business is suffering immediately. It's like literally the same half an hour period. Once it's published to once it's affecting you is within the same 60 minutes. So it
Right,
is
very
the
serious.
strongest, most brutal thing you can do to a carrier. And anybody who's publishing freight guards for things that aren't a stolen load or legitimate double brokering, or like basically illegal things only.
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, we got the comment. Can Dan recommend steps a carrier can take when dealing with blackmail? Okay, let's go back. So let's circle back
Yeah.
to the police report. So what would you say to the police? Like, I'm being extorted by this broker for this load.
Yeah, I'd like to file a police report for extortion. Here's the situation. The broker, I delivered a load for a broker. They wanted me to drive it 100 miles out of the way or pay money. I'm not willing to do that. That's not part of the contract. And they've threatened me to destroy my reputation with an online posting. They're extorting me.
So
That's a police
let
report.
me go over this with you. How legally binding is a rate confirmation? Because it's supposed to be a contract. It's supposed to hold some weight. And we all know, on both sides of the coin, being a carrier or a broker, the rate con is there. And this is the thing I've noticed with brokers, in the past 1 to 2 years. They've started doing things where it's like the rate con used to be the Bible. If it's on the rate con, it applies. So if you see $200 late fee for being a minute late to delivery, if you're a minute late to the delivery, you are getting deducted $200, and there's nothing you can do to dispute that because it's on the paper. You signed it, they signed it. That's how it is. But I've started noticing in this industry that the rate cons tend to have nothing anymore for the most part in terms of late fees, layover costs. Brokers are now saying, oh, well, you signed our setup agreement, and in that paperwork is where this language is now. So, I mean, from a law perspective, does the rate con hold weight? Does the carrier agreement sort of cancel it out? How does rate cons look from a legal perspective?
Well, that could be a whole nother podcast episode, Alex.
Okay, is that going to be one of those? Is that going to be
Con-
part 3 now? Are we going to
Part
just jump back
3.
to the blackmail and we'll leave
We're
that
gonna.
for part 3?
I can give you a
I'll let
very
you better
brief
prepare for the question like we did for the blackmail segment. So.
I can give you a very brief answer. That this has to do with contract law, and really, it's going to be if you're agreeing to a rate confirmation that incorporates certain other terms that are, for example, on a broker's website. Yeah, you're technically bound by those. And the question really also begins to be whether or not something is legal and binding. Okay, but are you going to go to court, for example, or fight over $200? That's the practical matter too. And I think a lot from a broker's perspective too. Yes, you can enforce this hidden term and you'd probably win in a court of law, but do you want that reputation? Or do you want to be known for going after carriers for $200? And that's where I think there's a lot of room to figure this stuff out.
I mean, let's go over the differences, I guess, between blackmail, civil extortion, and economic duress. Are there differences?
Yes.
What are the differences? Can you kind of take us through those terms legally?
It sounds like you read my article. I just posted it to LinkedIn.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to find out more about Dan, he's actually made a transportation section on his law firm's website, which I'll link to the end of the show in the comments somewhere.
Yeah, and you can go on LinkedIn and read my article that will tell you more about blackmail, civil extortion, and economic duress. But yeah, so blackmail or extortion, that's generally the criminal side of things. That's the term we used to refer to the crime that we just discussed. Civil extortion is the civil law, I guess, corollary of that. Again, similar elements. There has to be a threat. There has to be intent to derive some sort of economic benefit. But one important component in the civil case is that there has to be some sort of damage that's done to the carrier in complying with the threat. So, for example, if the carrier has to go out of their way, they've expended resources, fuel, or it cost them money, those are their damages for the civil extortion. Again, in the context that we were talking about in the a couple $100, you are not going to be filing a lawsuit for small scale civil extortion. Just, it's a practical matter. You're not going to be doing that. Is it available? Yes. So it is.
I guess depends how petty you are about it, to be honest. But what would you recommend to a carrier in that situation where they've been put in a situation where it's like you're gonna do something that is gonna make you lose money, drive 50 extra miles or waste a day, et cetera, or you're gonna get a freight guard on your company? What would your advice to a carrier be who's been put in that situation?
Well, if you're put in that situation, you kind of have to make a decision. Are you going to risk a freight guard? How much is a freight guard going to cost you? And maybe, in this instance, comply with the broker's demand. But then after the fact, you can give me a call and we can see what we can do and contact the broker and say, hey, here's the situation. This is blackmail. This is extortion. We have a cause of action for civil extortion, and you got to make this right.
Yeah, I mean, I think, after being, the manager of, many carriers and being kind of the decision maker in a lot of those tough situations through my dispatchers, et cetera. My best advice to carriers who have been put in, those situations where it's like you're going to get short paid less than $500 on something. Sometimes it depends. It's very situational, of course, but even if it's like 500, 600, 700 on a short pay, 1,200 on a short pay, are you willing to risk the freight guard? Are you willing to put your MC number through a freight guard? Are you willing to go through the process of explaining it to everybody? Are you willing to go through the monetary loss of having it on your MC? Because even if you can get it removed, it's not going to happen in 24 hours, 48 hours. And if you're a large enough operation, if you have 10, 20, 30, 40 trucks, 50 trucks, think about the amount of money you're about to lose, on future freight the next day, same day, right? So my best advice to carriers is, just kind of let the broker be a scumbag, let them do whatever it is they feel they need to do, and go through it and avoid the freight guard at all costs. And then, like you said, after the fact, contact Dan after the fact. How would this work? Can you leave like reviews, like a negative, you had a negative experience, I've been short paid XXX. What if they give you a freight guard at that point, just for leaving them a bad review? That's not something that should hold up, right?
Well, and again, what does the freight guard say? This guy left me
a negative review because I suck at doing business.
And I mean, you see this on LinkedIn, you see this on Facebook, on Twitter or X or whatever it's called nowadays. People going back and forth with each other and arguing and making posts. It's not necessarily, if it's truthful, if it's this guy screwed up, and then this guy left me a negative review, and it's true, and nobody committed any sort of crime, because you have to remember, we have the First Amendment in the United States, and so we do have freedom to say and comment, as long as these comments are truthful and not in a way that are designed to hurt.
Yeah, I mean, so my advice to carriers who go through these things is just kind of take it on the chin, especially if it's just like small amount, like $200, $300, $400. Take it on the chin, put the broker on do not use in your system, move on with your life. Maybe leave them a bad review if you feel inclined to maybe warn future people about specific operations. But I personally feel the freight guard is just so damaging that it's not worth going through. I mean, I've been through it multiple times. We've always got them removed, but that 5 to 10 to 15 business days of dealing with trying to remove it, it hurts. It's not worth it. And any broker who watches this back, just think next time. You can put a carrier on do not use because he was 10 minutes late and your customer yelled at you, instead of trying to basically close their entire operation with one freight guard report. And also be careful about your freight guard reports, because there's people like Dan out there who are going to be knocking on your door, and you're probably not going to want to deal with that. So
yeah, and I think also a good thing to remember for carriers is you're running a business, so sometimes you have to make a business decision as to what to do in a split second moment. If you feel like you've been wronged, like Alex said, I'd be happy to talk to carriers, even if, for example, I've had carriers call me, and I've talked to them about issues that I've said, look, there's really nothing you can do. You screwed up. And that's entirely possible too. So
that's entirely possible, of course.
a negative review is not necessarily illegal. So if you screwed up and got a negative review, you can't, unfortunately, or fortunately.
Yeah, I mean, if the freight guard report reads, a carrier picked up a load of fresh food. It was supposed to be, 5-degree reefer run. Their reefer was never turned on. The load was a full claim, and they got a freight guard for that. I'm sure you're not going to be able to defend them, because that's exactly what they did, and that's a warranted freight guard.
Absolutely. But let me just touch on the last piece of the blackmail conversation, this economic duress theory. That actually is that has to do with contract law, and it allows carriers or whoever's been induced through threats to enter into some sort of agreement or contract to basically void the contract and say, look, I was threatened. Yeah, I agreed to drive an extra 150 miles, but that's not part of my contract. That's void because I was threatened with a freight guard. So that's actually an important tool that people need to be aware of, that there's this concept of economic duress that you can use. For example, if the broker were to sue you for breach of contract or argue that you didn't comply with a rate con or their terms, if you feel like you've been induced into doing something by threat, then you have the economic duress defense in your pocket, and that's something that's valuable to remember.
Yeah, I mean, that's cool. That's pretty much my first time hearing about it. And I've been in those situations that many carriers probably have, where they're like, we're going to send you a new rate confirmation with an extra $72 on it, and you're going to go drive 300 more miles for us. And, you have to sign it. You have to do it. And then you can come back and be like, well, I signed it, but I also signed it because you told me you're going to give me a freight guard if I don't sign it. And let me contact Dan about this.
Well, yeah, and again, it might be a small amount, it might be a large amount, it might be we're talking hundreds of dollars here. Again, like I said, it's probably not worth going to court over, but at the same time, there could be large issues, and there could be brokers out there that are just serial misusers of freight guard, and so that's entirely a high risk proposition for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the message we got to kind of put out there to wrap this up is, if you're a carrier and you're staring down the barrel of a freight guard for, a $200-$300 short pay, something like this, just move on, just let it happen, move on with your life. Do not use the broker in your system. And also, if you're a broker watching this, be careful who you freight guard, and be careful how you freight guard them, and think about what you're doing, if it warrants a freight guard, or if you can just internally do not use them and, again, move on with your life. Because there are people like Dan out there. There are organizations forming. There are, these people and systems coming into play to defend carriers, to get rid of the freight guard, when it's not warranted. And I think that 411, it was a tool originally made for, a good purpose. It was to, protect people from bad carriers. And unfortunately, it's sort of turned into this way to cripple a business because you don't like them. And I feel like that's kind of where it's at in today's society.
Yeah, and one thing that I've heard also, just talking to a few people in the industry, is that Carrier 411 it's the most familiar forum, but it's not the only one. There are other platforms out there. There are other competitors coming out. And so, just because it's not called a freight guard it can still be a damaging negative review. It can still be
Yeah,
actionable, and
there's definitely emerging technologies
yeah,
that are toting the line of crippling carriers for the wrong reasons, and maybe we'll have an episode about that as we kind of look into it. It is a new player in the space, and it is something that's worrying me, being a past carrier and now being a broker and kind of being a part of the situation. So, like you said, 411 is the most familiar. It is, the household name. But with technology kind of moving forward, we're going to start to see a lot of ways for carriers to look bad when they aren't. And I mean, I'm just happy we have, people like you out there that are looking out for the carriers. I'm happy that carriers are starting to become more literate in terms of using social media, in terms of seeking out help. And it's just, it's tough.
yeah,
It's tough there for carriers, that's for sure.
absolutely. And a lot of the carriers are small businesses, mom and pop shops that are not necessarily familiar with the various legal remedies or what they can do. And and a lot, like I mentioned, I think before, I've even helped people with language barriers, where a carrier, for example, their native language is not English, but they're trying to resolve a problem with the broker who just doesn't understand, and there's a loss in translation. And although it doesn't necessarily or directly have anything to do with the law, I've still enjoyed helping carriers out, like I said, to solve problems and to find a way where, what could be potentially crippling to their business, like a freight guard, to get it resolved in a way that works for everyone.
No, of course. I mean, Dan's, bilingual. He can help out, the Russian speaking community and anybody, similar languages. And he'll, help you out if you have any freight guard issues, general law issues. But I mean, let's get it wrapped up, Dan. I'm going to hint maybe
Yeah,
at a part 3 where we kind of discuss rate cons and maybe we discuss some emerging technologies regarding carrier defamation. But that'll be, at some point, hopefully in the future.
absolutely.
It's always a pleasure to have you on. It's always fun to talk to, I always say, quote unquote, a real lawyer, because we have, a lot of the people out there on the internet who think they're lawyers, but you actually are a lawyer. So it's
I
always
am.
I want to wrap it up with you with 2 last questions. First
Sure.
one's gonna be, what is your craziest logistics story or stories?
What's my craziest logistics story?
Yeah.
In terms of having handled a case?
I mean, in any capacity, if it involves trucking, trucks, truck drivers, anything that has to do with the trucking space.
Yeah, well, my craziest one is, I think I might have mentioned this one last time, but it was basically a carrier who booked a load with a broker, and the carrier was in California. The broker was out on the East Coast. The broker started calling the driver 6 hours before the load was to get picked up. The driver was sleeping. The driver ignored the call. The broker freaked out. And again, hours before the load was to be picked up, the broker not only canceled the load, but posted not 1, not 2, but 3 separate freight guards against this poor carrier, accusing them of everything from double brokering to not having a truck in the area to all kinds of things. And the
All
funniest
of
thing
this
about
is
that
because
one,
he's sleeping. Like,
what's that?
all of this is due to the driver sleeping before the pickup when there's a bunch of time left.
Yeah, I think it was like 7 a.m. and the pickup was at 2 p.m.
Jesus.
And the driver was taking his federally mandated 10-hour rest.
Yeah, he's like
So,
legally sleeping in the
legally
truck.
sleeping. Exactly. So that is probably the craziest situation and the most extreme example of
Of misuse.
a misuse. And I just have never seen anything like that. since
Yeah,
or
I mean,
before
3
that.
reports for legally sleeping, 7
No,
hours before your
they never
pickup is
even
insane.
picked anything up.
Yeah, they didn't even do anything. They just booked the load and
No.
got freight guarded 3 times.
Yeah, this guy's
they,
just
they were
like,
just
wow,
they just received the PDF in their email and got 3 freight guards, man.
yeah, and then the owner is on the West Coast. It's 5:30 a.m. He's getting these crazy emails and texts, and he's like, "What is going on?"
Yeah, he's like, how do you expect us? I'm
what?
not gonna wake up at 4 in the morning just because you live in New York, buddy. Like,
Well, again, what was there to talk about? The pickup was not until 2.
yeah. I mean,
So,
but let's
anyway.
wrap it up with the final and last question. I'm sure you probably know what's coming. It is gonna be chicken wing choices. So,
Ooh, all
Mr.
right.
Artaev, are you a drums or flats kind of guy?
I'm a drums kind of guy.
That's the right answer. Are you a ranch or blue cheese kind of guy?
I say that again.
Ranch or blue cheese for dipping sauce?
Ranch, because I heard that blue cheese smells like stinky feet.
Stinky, moldy feet. Thanks
Moldy
to
feet. Yes, I
Bruno.
saw that post.
And he said, "Get that off my plate, sir."
That's right.
And the
That's right.
last question: are you a breaded or non-breaded type of guy?
Non-breaded.
You were almost there, man. I mean, the
I
ranch
was
I don't
almost
agree with, but the drums, the drums is I'm gonna die on that hill. That drums are better to the flats, so we agree there.
Yeah.
The blue cheese is, an acquired taste, so I don't ever have, I don't deduct points on people choosing ranch because most people don't like blue cheese. That's completely fine. But the breaded versus non-breaded, we're back to having problems because I don't think I've ever seen a non-breaded drum in my life. So.
I think there has to be one. No?
Yeah, of course there has to be. I just like breaded chicken wings. But that's it, man, for episode 14 and episode 2 for you. Like I said, we will find our way back to an episode 3 at some point. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you coming on and talking about it and what you do for the carriers. So if anybody, has issues regarding freight guards, message Dan, hit up Dan. He has a great website. You can see what else he does. He's not just the logistics lawyer. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Alex. Always a pleasure.
Always, Dan. We'll be in touch for sure.
Sounds good.
And that's it for episode 14 of podcast. That's Dan's second episode, and we will be bringing him back.